Buenos días y gracias de nuevo por estar ahí en esta serie de seminarios que estamos haciendo del IMIM para aprovechar en lo posible este periodo de confinamiento. Como sabéis, ya hemos tenido seminarios de cáncer, ya hemos tenido también seminarios del programa de enfermedades inflamatorias y estamos encantados de tener un investigador del programa de neurociencias, el doctor Óscar del Pozo. Muchas gracias a todos de nuevo y muchas gracias, Óscar, a ti sobre todo, por preparar la presentación. Cuando quieras, Vanessa.
Gracias, Joaquín. Bueno, solo mencionar que el grupo de Óscar se dedica a la metabolómica aplicada y forma parte del programa además del programa de neurociencias, del grupo de farmacología integrada y neurociencias del sistema, del CINS. Y hoy Óscar nos va a hablar de cómo encontrar biomarcadores apropiados de estrés. Recordaros a todos que podéis dejar vuestras preguntas en el apartado de preguntas. Quizás intentemos al final, en función de cómo veamos que trabaja el sistema, daros paso al micro si queréis hacer las preguntas de viva voz. Es algo que intentamos la última vez, que parece que es viable, aunque un poco complicado. Y bueno, tenéis las dos modalidades, o bien por escrito en el apartado de preguntas, o bien utilizar el icono de la mano para indicar que queréis que os demos voz al final del seminario. Sin más, te doy paso, Óscar, cuando quieras.
Muchas gracias, Vanessa. Joaquín, I will perform the presentation in English as we yeah. First, thank you to be there. It will be difficult to perform that a presentation without seeing your faces, but I will try to do my best. As you know, our life is dedicated to the establishment of reliable biomarkers. In the metabolomics platform, we are working with several diseases, and thinking about this presentation, I thought in the current situation with this COVID-19 around us, and this strange situation, we are all at home with the children here, with the rest of the family in a different place. So I think that we can agree that that is a very stressful situation. And therefore, I thought that it could be nice to have a presentation telling our history, looking for biomarkers of stress. So I decided to perform this speech, and first I will introduce a little bit what stress is. So a stressor is an event that might be considered as challenging for the individual safety. So it's something that you consider that can hurt you. Once you feel the stressor, there is a cascade of hormones which is called the stress response system, and this system produces a well-orchestrated physiological changes. So it increases the heart rate, the breathing, the muscle tense, and even it started to appear the sweat. So there are several physiological changes related with the occurrence of the stressor. This stress response can be considered as for an evolutionary point of view as a survival response. In fact, all these changes help us to one of the most difficult decisions that we have as a species we have to take. When we face a problem, we have to decide if we fight the problem or if we fly. And for that reason, this response is often called the fight or flight response. So itself, stress is a good mechanism for survival, but it's different if you have a chronic stress. If this stressor is all the time with us, and in fact, as chronic stress is related with several diseases like depression, cardiovascular diseases, and so on. So stress itself is not bad, but chronic stress starts to be. And also is not healthy to have stress in the prenatal status. So the prenatal distress has been associated with spontaneous abortion or preterm labor and several other disorders for the baby. Sorry. So if the chronic stress and the prenatal stress have to be monitored, we need reliable biomarkers to determine them. When we want to determine a biomarker, first we have to go, we always go first to the pathway which is related with that situation. In the case of stress, we have to go to the HPA axis. There are a cascade of hormones, starting with the hypothalamus and going to the adrenal, and cortisol is the last hormone of this cascade, and therefore cortisol has been traditionally considered as the best biomarker for stress. But the use of cortisol as a stress biomarker has several limitations. The first one is that cortisol have a really marked circadian rhythm. In fact, the cortisol secretion is one of the most important points of the circadian rhythm. And what that means for a biomarker point of view, that the plasmatic levels of cortisol depends on the timing point of the sample collection. So you have different levels of cortisol during the day than in the evening. So that should be taken into account when collecting the sample or when even considering this as a biomarker. An additional limitation is the apprehension. So cortisol is increased in stressful situations, and collecting blood is considered by some people as a stressful situation. So it is logical that if you think that you are going to see a needle in your arm, so your cortisol will increase. And that is known since the 60s, and that these are the normal ranges for plasmatic cortisol, and the levels of cortisol depends on the unknown situation you are going to face. If you go to the doctor without any known scenario, you have higher cortisol levels than if the situation is a familiar one. So mainly based on these two limitations, these are the reasons that the stress is normally measured by subjective test. The most important one is the perceived stress scale, the PSS test. The PSS test is how often have you been upset because of something that happened unexpectedly. So basically, all these questions are asking you, did you feel stress in the last month? So they are very useful because they can be, you can collect a lot of information from a lot of volunteers or a lot of patients, but the main limitation is that this information is subjective. So we don't have at the moment any objective biomarker of stress. But if we think about this limitation, this circadian rhythm and the apprehension, this limits or serum. So probably the cortisol, but the matrix, and using a different matrix, we can limit the limitations, let's say like this. And in fact, the most important matrix for chronic stress is hair. The rationale using hair is that that's the bloodstream here, and the cortisol in the bloodstream goes into the hair, and is the cortisol in the hair is growing with the hair. That means that the cortisol content in this first centimeter of hair, the hair is growing around 1 centimeter per month. So the cortisol content in that 1 centimeter of hair will be related with your stress in the last month, and the second month, the third month, and so on. So using that, we don't care about the circadian rhythm, and we don't care about apprehension. So the hair is the ideal matrix for chronic stress. And that has been started to be confirmed by the use of animal models, in which if you increase the stress, the concentration of hair corticosterone also increased. And it increased irrespective of the stress of the stress test. So you can perform different stress tests, and the levels of hair corticosterone always increase. So it is a promising marker, the hair cortisol. If that happened in animals, we would expect that in humans, an increase of stress would provide an increase in hair cortisol. And the first reports, like 10 years ago, 10, 15 years ago, started to say that, yeah, there is a statistically significant increase when you correlate the hair cortisol level self-reported stress. So based on these promising results, several researchers started to use the hair cortisol as a marker of stress in several diseases like depression, or even psychiatric illness, or chronic pain, or dementia. So there is an extensive use of hair cortisol in stress-related research. But at the same time, there are an increasing number of evidence showing the poor correlation between hair cortisol and self-reported stress. So there are dozens of papers saying that they couldn't find any correlation between self-reported stress and hair cortisol. Even in a stressful situation, as stressful as a war, they couldn't find this correlation between hair cortisol and their self-reported stress. So we are starting to have doubt about the suitability of the hair cortisol. So now the current situation is that the hair cortisol is extensively used, but we have several doubts about its suitability. So now, as researchers, we can continue using this hair cortisol. We can fly, or we can fight and try to find a better biomarker for stress than hair cortisol. Since that is our work, that is our life, we decided to fight and to find a better biomarker of stress. And we started for chronic stress. Our first idea was that, yes, all these reports saying the poor correlation, most of them use immunoassays-based techniques for the detection of hair cortisol. And mainly for low concentration, immunoassays are not reliable. So probably that was the problem. The concentration of cortisol is too low that we are not using the proper technique for this determination. And in fact, that is something that happened with several steroids. That is the comparison between mass chromatography and immunoassay for testosterone. in theory, if the level is 1, that means that the correlation is perfect between the data of the GCMS and the data of the immunoassay. And you see that at higher concentration, the correlation is quite good, but at low concentration, the correlation, there are even 5-fold difference between the immunoassay and the mass spectrometry. So probably that is also happening with the hair cortisol, and therefore we decided to develop a mass spectrometric method for the determination of cortisol in hair. As probably you know, mass spectrometry is obviously based on the determination of a mass, and the molecular weight of cortisol is 362, and we can determine the protonated ion at 363. You will see here 363, and we can clearly differ from corticosterone because the molecular weight are different, and therefore, although they are so similar, because the molecular weight is different, we can determine cortisol and cortisone irrespectively one from the other. Also, we can determine compounds which are even more similar, like the case of the 20-alpha dehydrocortisol and the 20-beta dehydrocortisol. They only differ in the stereochemistry of this carbon, and we can clearly differentiate between the 20-alpha and the 20-beta metabolite. So we have the best technique in the world. I have to say so. And we were very happy because we were able to determine very clearly. You can see here the peak, a very clear peak for cortisol, but suddenly it appeared an unexpected problem with some diet hair samples in which there were a lot of interferences. In that way, that's our job. We started, so the cortisol should be somewhere here with the arrow. We are not able to detect the cortisol here, but that's our job. We really love to improve our methods, and in that case, using an adduct with formate, we were able to determine both the dyeing sample and the undying sample. So finally, we had a reliable method. We validated it, so we have a good method based on mass spectrometry, and now we were able to confirm if hair cortisol is correlated with the PSS, the self-reported stress. And these were the results. If I have to be honest, I expect that they were better than this, so they are worse than expected. And we wanted to have ideas about why that's happening. So there are several potential reasons. The first one is that the hair is not the ideal matrix. Probably we selected a wrong matrix, or probably cortisol is not the appropriate biomarker. But also it can happen that the composition of the hair is altering the incorporation of cortisol into the hair, and different hairs can have different incorporation rates of cortisol, and we have to normalize somewhere this incorporation. We really support the hair as a matrix for chronic stress, and therefore we started to evaluate this. And the first one is probably cortisol is not the best marker. And because we are part of the metabolomic platform, we work with metabolomics. In that way, we started to study the steroidome, which are all the steroids in the sample. we have a hypothesis, which is that stress might produce additional alteration in the steroid more than the increase of cortisol. But this should be in parallel with the increase of cortisol. So we decided to investigate which metabolites or which ratios will increase at the same time than cortisol. And to evaluate this, we use urine because it's easy to collect. We have a lot of experience in the group with urine, and it's very informative. And it's very informative because these are all the metabolites that we can detect in urine from cortisol. There are 20, almost 20 metabolites from cortisol. So we can have a very nice overview of the steroidome in urine. So we evaluate the circadian rhythm in urine, looking for this metabolites and ratio, which increases at the same time than cortisol. You see here the circadian rhythm of cortisol in 2 volunteers, and we found several metabolites and ratios. I show in you one of them, which is the ratio between the 20 alpha and the 20 beta metabolites, which also have exactly the same circadian variation as cortisol. So we saw that if cortisol also increase the ratio between the 20 alpha and the 20 beta. For instance, for that reason, we can hypothesize that when the stress increases, it will also increase the ratio between 20 alpha and 20 beta. So we would need to determine the 20 alpha, 20 beta rate. That's the complete steroidome in urine. Of course, in hair, we have a different steroidome, is a more reduced one, but remarkably, we are able to detect the 20 alpha and the 20 beta metabolites. So we can evaluate if these ratios can help in can be good biomarkers of stress. These were the results using hair cortisol. And if we use ratios, these are the new results. So here you see, here you see the self-reported stress and our new marker. And now this correlation is what we expected to have. So it seems that the real good marker for stress. In order to have additional information about that, we started to collaborate with the Grup de Recerca en Desigualtats en Salut from the Universitat Pompeu Fabra, and they are trying to determine how the working conditions affect on stress. And these are the results using our marker. So these are our marker, and that is the net salary. So it seems that if your salary is higher, you have less stress, but if you have lower salary, your stress gone up. So that is a quite logical result, but that is in a way confirming the suitability of this marker for stress. Also, that's the answer to the question, are you suffering from authoritarian mania? And if the answer is always or several times, you have more stress than if your answer is never or almost only few times. So again, we have these results are very preliminary. We are still working on that, but these results are showing that this biomarker is a promising one. And now we need to validate this the suitability of these biomarkers, and we are going to do that in the frame of the BIGS project with the people of the ES Global. And I didn't mention an additional problem of her determination is what happened with that kind of patients, what happened with me. So we have checked the hair and the beard concentration, and at least for that people with beard, we can use also the steroidome as a marker for cortisol in beard. And now, the last part of the history is how to evaluate the prenatal stress. So, as you probably know, maternal stress might affect the baby. And in fact, there are several reports saying so. In fact, maternal stress is related with emotional problems of the baby, of hyperactivity, or even with impaired cognitive development. So it seems that if the mother is stressed, the fetus in the intrauterine environment will be also stressed. However, when people try to confirm that, they found that there was no difference in cortisol levels in amniotic fluid between stressed and non-stressed mothers, or the role of cortisol in mediating the effect of maternal mood in fetal development remains to be demonstrated. So there are different outcomes depending on the maternal stress, but it seems that there is no difference in cortisol. And what is the effect of maternal stress here in the fetus? We thought that probably the problem is that here again, we are focusing only in the hormone, only in cortisol. And probably there are additional or better biomarkers of prenatal stress rather than cortisol itself. And to look for these biomarkers, we have to understand a little bit what is happening with maternal stress. So that's the HPA axis of the mother releasing cortisol, but in pregnancy there is an additional important player, which is the placenta. So placenta inactivates the maternal cortisol into inactive cortisol by this enzyme, the 11-beta HSD2, this enzyme here. And therefore, the placenta plays a critical role in the protection of the fetus against maternal stress. Additionally, it is remarkable that the maternal stress affects in a different way males than females, boys than girls, and that is a common situation in the intrauterine environment, because some prenatal adversity affect more negatively male than females. And there are reported several. You can see here the list of all the outcomes which are worst in males than in females when we are young. And among them, one of them is the maternal stress. Probably it's very exaggerated, the title of this paper, but it's quite illustrating. That they say boys live dangerously in the womb. So if we want to have biomarkers of prenatal stress, we must consider not only looking for prenatal stress, but also that there might be sex differences and that the placenta have an important role. So we have to find some biomarkers trying to combine all this situation, and it's not easy, as you can imagine. And the first thing we have to think is in which matrix we have to do our experiments. Some experiments are done in cord blood, but we really don't. We prefer not to use, because there is only one time point information. We prefer to use the amniotic fluid, because at least you have like a pool, an average information for between 1 and 3 days of cortisol metabolism. And then we developed and we validated and we published a method for the determination of the steroidome in amniotic fluid. And if that is the complete set of steroids in urine, these are the steroids that we are able to determine in amniotic fluid. So it's not bad at all. We can have a really complete picture of the steroidome in amniotic fluid. We can, including metabolites and ratios, we can determine 45 biomarkers. And in order to look for these biomarkers of prenatal stress, we started a collaboration with the BCN Natal in Barcelona from the Hospital Clinic and Hospital Sant Joan de Déu. We started with 89 pregnant women, and we had the amniotic fluid for this woman, half boys, half girls, and we divided them between cesarean delivery and vaginal delivery. We took cesarean delivery as a view of the rest status, the unstressful or just the basal stress situation, and the vaginal delivery in order to know what is happening under a biological stressful situation like the delivery. We have between around 20-25 samples per group, and with these groups we can have a lot of information. For instance, we can compare boys and girls in the rest status. Here, we will, with this comparison, we will be able to know the sex differences. The first thing we saw is the cortisol content, and we didn't find any difference in cortisol content. So the final cortisol is the same. There are no differences. But one of the advantages of using this steroidome is that we can have information about what the enzymes are doing. And here we can, for instance, all the cortisol metabolites and refer to all the cortisone metabolites, and we will have information about these critical enzymes, this 11-beta-HSD2. And these were the results. So our results suggested that males are more protected by 11-beta-HSD2 than males. So females are more protected. But that's very strange, because I would expect that if females are more protected, they will have less cortisol content. And as we saw in the previous slide, the cortisol content is the same. So why this cortisol content is the same if the females are more protected? Again, the steroidome gave us the answer to that. We could also evaluate by comparison of the 20-beta DHEF against cortisol. We could evaluate this other enzyme, this CBR1 enzyme. And in that case, we saw that males are more protected than females. So, in summary, we have discovered that the protection against maternal cortisol differs between females and males. Females are more protected by 11-beta-HSD2, which is the common enzyme for protection, and the less activity of these enzymes in males seems to be compensated by a higher activity of the CBR1, which inactivates cortisol into 20-beta dehydrocortisol. Then we could also evaluate the comparison between cesarean and vaginal delivery, so non-stressful situation and a stressful situation. And we started with females. And the first thing we saw is that under stress conditions, females, the protection of 11-beta-HSD2 is reduced in females. But this reduction seems to be compensated by the activity of the CBR1. and as a result, the content of cortisol remains with no difference between the cesarean and the vaginal delivery. When we did the same for males, we compared the cesarean and the vaginal delivery to know what is happening with the stress. We again found a decrease in the protection by the 11 beta, but in that case we didn't see this increase in protection by CBR1, and as a result, we observed a trend in increasing cortisol content in males. If we put all the information together, then we will see that I hope that you see exactly the same as we did, that males without stress in cesarean delivery have exactly the same enzymatic situation, the same homeostasis of the cortisol than the stressed females. So it's like without the stress, the situation of the male in the intrauterine environment is exactly the same that the females with stress. In summary of this effect of the stress, in females, we saw a reduction of the 11 beta, which is compensated by the CBR1, and then we saw an increase of the 20 beta and DHF. In males, this reduction of the 11 beta is not compensated, and therefore we saw an increase in cortisol. And now we wanted to know if these markers can predict or can have an influence in one of the baby's outcomes. We decided to select the cesarean delivery just to check without any additional stress, only the basal stress situation, how these markers are affecting the birth weight. And these were the result. You see here in females a clear negative correlation between the stress marker and the birth weight. So it seems that if the baby has higher stress, is lower, and when the stress is reduced, the birth weight is higher. Contrarily, in males, we see an increase. It's a trend, but it's an increase between the stress and the birth weight. So it seems that the males which are less stressed has less weight than the males which have higher stress. And that is in agreement with a theory that's saying that males are adapting to their function to allow for continued growth, while females reduce growth in an attempt to survive further maternal insults. So they are like two different mechanisms of adaptation depending on the sex. So using the steroidome, mainly these three components, we are able to evaluate the prenatal stress, to differentiate the sex differences, and even to find of placenta. And just to conclude, for me the most important conclusion is that if we are using a proper biomarker, we will have new insights in our research. If we are only focused on one hormone or one analyte, the results are, if you only see a partial view of the complete pathway, you will have partial conclusions. And to finalize, I would like to thank both Mireillas for the preset Payan, Marion, and Jordi for the BIS project, and Yesid, Fatima, and Eduard for phenomapping URGR. And of course, I would like to thank all the people of the Metabolomics platform. In that case, a special thanks for Alex and Noe, because they perform all the analysis, and Klaus, which helps with the statistical analysis. And thank you very much for your attention. I will be more than happy to answer your questions.
Thank you very much, Oscar. It was a really interesting presentation. We have some questions that we are going to take now, and if anyone else want to ask any question, you can just write them down in the questions part, or even use the hand icon, and we will try to access your microphone. So the first question is from Arnau Busquets, and his question is there any correlation between hair corticosterone and brain corticosterone in animal models?
That's between hair and brain.
Yes.
Yes. Sorry that you know that I don't hear you very in the best conditions. Actually, I don't know if that has been reported, but you have to take into account that brain corticosterone is you will take only at that point. So we have experience with brain corticosterone, which is increasing. If you can even know the order in which the animal were sacrificed using brain corticosterone, and the hair corticosterone, you will have an average of the last month, the last weeks of life. So if I'm sure that if you can have a global overview of the corticosterone in hair, of the corticosterone in brain, they will correlate with the corticosterone in hair, but I don't think that will be possible.
Okay, thank you very much. The next question is, do you think we can have a different stress-related biomarker predicting or causing fight or flight responses to stress? That's
a good question, because yeah, several times we use this fight or flight like a whole, but there are differences, and it is possible that the metabolism of cortisol or corticosterone must have an impact on the decision we take. That will be really nice to evaluate, but I'm quite confident about finding that biomarker.
Okay, thank you. And finally, he says a naive question. I think it's kind of interesting. It seems stress produces hair loss, and I was wondering if the hair we are losing because of stress is the one with higher concentration of cortisol.
Wow. Yeah, that's I think that no one look at that if this hair have more cortisol than the other one. Probably under these current situations, we can collect the hairs that we are losing, and then compare with the ones we are not losing, and see if there is a difference in cortisol or in the steroid. That will be funny and nice.
Mm-hmm. Okay, now a question from Joaquin Arribas. Nowadays, it's easy with wearable device to monitor continuously heart rate. Would it not be an objective and reliable marker of stress? In fact, it's one of the hallmark of stress, isn't it?
Yeah, that's really true, and most of the experiments related with stress with stress in one time use heart rate. But if we are telling about chronic stress, the heart rate, you would have to make an average of a month a heart rate, just to know which is the average of your chronic stress. So I think is probably the best marker for a punctual situation which is causing stress, but not for the chronic stress.
Oscar, this is Joaquin. Can you hear me?
Yes.
Yeah. What I was asking is this: now with these watches and these wearable devices, actually you have a continuous monitoring of heart, so you don't have to have any average. You can have the whole picture continuously in a person. I was wondering if you are planning to correlate levels of stress, continuously monitor by heart rate with any of the biomarkers that you are working with.
That's a good idea. But as you know, these devices are normally they are used to runners and so on. So there are other effects which also increase your heart rate rather than stress. So it's a very interesting idea, and it would be nice to correlate it. But then we have to think a lot in which confounding factors we will have with the heart rate, because stress is one, but it's not the only one marker which increase the heart rate.
Okay, we have another question from Gabriel Gui. He says, "Hi Oscar, Gabriel Gui here, nice talk. Are these markers altered in people suffering from hypercholesterolemia or taking anti-cholesterolemic drugs?"
That's one of the problems of that presentation. That is why they are quite preliminary results. So all these questions that additional confounding factors for these markers, we don't know, and we expect that with the big cohort of the BISC, we will start to have an idea about which factors can also be altered with these biomarkers, or by this or by other biomarkers, but at the moment we don't know.
Okay, thank you. I have a naive question. I was wondering how trustable are the self-reported stress?
That's the question that we always have, and I always make the same comparison. So you can have your body weight and you can ask a questionnaire about your body weight. I expect a good correlation between a questionnaire and a real biomarker in these cases, because a very thin person wouldn't mark never at 9 or 10 in that scale, and a bigger person would never mark at 0 or 1. So I expect that something will happen similar with the stress, that from a population point of view, people which are more stressed will score higher in this test than people without this stress. But if you have 25 and another person have 27, we cannot say that you are less stressed than the other one. So we cannot make this comparison, but in population studies, they are useful. And for this reason, we want to have a biomarker which is correlated with the self-reported stress.
Okay, thank you. We have another question. What will be more determinant to produce deleterious effects of stress, the intensity or the chronicity? A chronic stress or a high intense stress?
Sorry, now I couldn't understand you.
What will be worse, an intense stress or a chronic low level of stress?
I would say that it will be worse, a chronic moderate level of stress. I would say so. Of course, if the 1 point stress is so high, then you can that will be really have a very bad consequences for your health, but should be very bad. But in general, I would say that continuous exposure to moderate stress will be worse than 1 point high stress.
Okay, thank you. Finally, another my question. So in your presentation, you exposed that stress can be related to upper respiratory infections. Given the current situation with COVID, could you explain this relation?
Well, yes, yeah, with one of the reaction on the stress is that you try to have more oxygen. So that you are like, let's say that that your body is reaching the limits, their own limits, and if you are like this in several times, then they started to have different problems because of that, the cardiovascular and the respiratory. Here, a link between the stressful situation and the illness, I don't see it. If I have to be honest, I don't see it.
Okay, thank you very much, Oscar. I think there are no more questions, so we can leave it here. I'm going just to switch to Spanish to say goodbye. Muchas gracias a todos por participar en esta, creo que es cuarta sesión de IMIM Seminars at Home. Continuaremos la semana que viene, si todo va según lo previsto, con una presentación sobre proyectos de investigación en COVID que han sido financiados en el IMIM. Y nada, únicamente agradecerte de nuevo, Óscar, la estupenda presentación. Para mí particularmente ha sido muy interesante, no conocía nada sobre este campo y espero que tengamos más participación del programa de neurociencias y del resto de programas de IMIM para poder continuar conociendo las diferentes líneas de investigación. Gracias, Óscar.
Gracias a vosotros por